This production is brought to you by the University of Edinburgh.
So actually, I've decided not to do exactly what Moshe hinted at, which is to talk about Amir's intellectual legacy, because if any audience knows about that legacy in more or in less detail, this is the FLoC audience. So I'm going to concentrate most of my time on his personality and on some anecdotes, but I will mention his science too. So what I said was that I'm going to spend most of my time on Amir's personality, because this kind of audience doesn't need too much introduction to his science, and I don't know if I should apologize for that in advance. So the title for this talk, this is the way I would write down the title. This is my style. Amir Pnueli, a gentle giant, lord of the phis and the psis. I remember he was the first person to call it a phi, whereas many Israelis call it a phi. But Amir had a very different style of presentation, and if he were to have prepared the previous slide, it would have probably looked a lot more like this. and if you look at the top right and left and bottom corners, you'd probably add these things also. And because Amir's presentations looked like this, I could never figure out the color coding scheme. It was about 10 to 20 different colors in each presentation. But he got away with that. And you can start seeing the Greek letters all over the place here. Here are some more Greek letters. And Amir, I think, I mean, when we give presentations, most of us, we try to keep things simple, 2 or 3 bullets, maybe a little diagram. Amir could get away with this. And the amazing thing was that you could understand it, and when he explained, things would really make a lot of sense. I do want to give a very short biography. It's extremely short because it just highlights some of his stages of his career. So he was born in Nahalal, which, as pointed out to me by Moshe, wasn't exactly Israel at the time. So it depends how you want to define where that is. It's a kind of agricultural area in the north of Israel. I don't know how many of you know this, but he completed his PhD in applied mathematics, calculating tidal calculations for the ocean under Chaim Pekeris, who was the founder of our department at Weizmann. And then during a brief stint at Stanford and Yorktown, at which time I think he also met Zohar Mana, he switched to computer science. Then he was at the Weizmann Institute until 1973, and at that point in time, a very interesting thing happened. There were actually 3 young, brilliant computer scientists at Weizmann. Besides Amir, there was Shimon Even and Zohar Mana, and the 3 of them within a year left Weizmann, each one for a completely different reason. And then Amir went to Tel Aviv University. This was the period in which I did my master's thesis under him. I did not do my PhD with him, but my master's, yes. And then in 1980, he returned to the Weizmann Institute. In fact, there were 4 people who returned together to form the newly formed computer science group. Besides Amir, there was Adi Shamir, Shimon Ullman from Vision, and myself. As you all know, he received the Turing Award in 1996. And in parallel, so he was actually on the Weizmann faculty until his death last year, but in parallel, the last 10 years of his life, he spent a large part of his time at NYU. And he died in New York in November of last year and was buried right not far from our institute in Harvard. Now just a little bit about his science, because as I said, I really am certain that most of you know a lot of his contributions, and in any case, these are the kinds of things you can easily read up and hear about from others, so I hope I'm not doing disservice to the slot that I've been given here. But he was a real giant in the area of logic, verification, semantics, and many other topics. And of course, temporal logic was his most significant bit, to use another term that I heard from Moshe in this context. And he got for that the Turing Award in 1996. But I've just listed here some of the other major contributions that he made or made together with other people. So he contributed quite a lot to dynamic logic, especially propositional dynamic logic in the 1980s. He has made many contributions to the semantics of concurrency, to understanding concurrency. He was co-definer of the notion of reactive systems. And of course, many issues in verification, including temporal verification, deductive verification, are due to him and to Zohar Mana, among others. He also contributed to the semantics of languages like state charts. He co-designed the StateMate tool, for which he shared the ACM Software System Award. Actually, it's interesting that he got the Turing Award in 1996 and a much lesser award in 2007. I forget what year he was made ACM Fellow, but I happened to be on the committee then, and one of the big surprises we had that there were several Turing Award winners who were not ACM Fellows, and that was because they were not Turing Award winners when the first batch of Fellows was made from among the major ACM awardees. So, and then we looked through the regulations, and it turned out you have to be nominated. And not only that, you have to have been a member of the ACM continuously for 5 years. I think there are still a couple of Turing Award winners who have not satisfied this second requirement and who are not ACM Fellows. But Amir somehow was nominated and later got also ACM Fellowship. The notion of synthesis, especially reactive synthesis work he did to a large extent together with Ronnie Rosnell, a major player in the definition of and initial investigations of hybrid systems, more recent work on compiler validation, which I particularly happen to like a lot, many contributions to model checking, to the automata theory and game theory behind model checking, abstraction, and many, many more things. So I think there's no doubt that he really was a towering figure in our community. And as I said, there's no problem identifying his most significant bit in research, but an interesting question would be, what was Amir's second most significant bit? So if you take away temporal logic, what's the most important thing that Amir did? And I'm just going to leave this as an open question, because the importance of some of the other major things that he did might only become clear in years to come, so I'll leave this for future research. But I'd like to spend the remaining time that I have on his personality, and the title was A Gentle Giant, and the gentle comes from him being an astonishingly rare gentleman. The other reason, of course, for making this talk more personal and talking about him as a person is because there are many younger people in the audience, and I think many of the people here did not know Amir personally, maybe heard him give some talks, and this is no less an important part of him as a human being than his science. So let me talk about that. So I'd like to show you 3 paragraphs taken from the words spoken at his funeral last year. I'll read these out for you in case it's too small. Amir was first and foremost a human being, a person who was at the very same time a giant scientist and an intellectual whose knowledge in areas of interest spanned the entire world: music, art, science, history, even restaurants. I could put in more there: restaurants, wine. It was a tremendous pleasure going out with him to a dinner at a conference, and lots more. But he was also a tremendously gentle and pleasant person, a generous person, shy and humble, a friend, a man of conversation, but first and foremost modest and unassuming in an extreme and rare fashion of the kind one does not find at all. And then later on, but for us his followers and direct scientific beneficiaries, we followed him not just for his intelligence, his wisdom, and his greatness as a scientist, but also and mainly for his personality, for his ability to share with everyone his wisdom and ideas, everyone, small and large, with his hallmark unlimited generosity that was given with great self-deprecation. Amir never committed any of the sins that are so common among scientists: a large ego, arrogance, superficiality, haste, chase of honor and credit, possessiveness of ideas, and the inability to happily give credit to others. And then this eulogy became a little more personal, and among other things I said that I talked directly to him. You were as a brother to me, you were a father figure, you were a friend, someone to consult about anything at all. You were encouraging and faithful, and you gave tremendous amounts of unlimited credit. You were a true intellectual, brilliant and deep, but most importantly, you were a human being, a special and rare human being of the kind that no longer exists. They've simply stopped making those kinds of people anymore. And depending on how time goes by, I'd like to share with you some personal, semi-personal anecdotes accompanied with some photographs. So I met Amir in 1974 which was when he was just about 34 years old. So I've known him half of his life. This photo, I think, is from 1978, so it was a little later, taken a little later, but still he had his blackboard, not his whiteboard, at Tel Aviv University. And what I'd like to share with you is one of these cases that I think many of us have, where a person says something to you. It might just be a 7 or 8 word sentence, and this changes your life completely. And the person I want to mention is not Amir Pnueli, it's someone else by the name of Pini Rabinowitz. And I call this my Pini Rabinowitz Miracle. This photo was taken in 2000. This was a party we made in honor of Amir receiving the Israel Prize. And this is Pini Rabinowitz, who actually died a couple of years after this picture was taken. So Rabinowitz was a numerical analyst in our department. And I had known him since my undergraduate studies. And back in 1974, I started a master's degree at Tel Aviv University in pure mathematics, trying to do algebraic topology. And after reading algebraic topology for about a year, I figured that I don't think anything tremendous will come of that effort. And I got fed up that I couldn't even see the end of what was known and where I could maybe start doing something new. So I actually decided to quit. And at the time, I was already programming 1 or 2 days a week, keeping up my young family. So I figured I'd just quit and go back to programming full time. And then I met Pini. And he said to me, what's going on? And I told him what I just told you. And he said, yeah, but you took computer science and mathematics as an undergraduate. And I said, yes. So he said, so why don't you do computer science for your master's? So I said, well, I know computer science. This was even before people taught P and NP regularly in courses. And I thought that computer science was programming and languages. So he said, no, he said, I think there's some theoretical stuff that might appeal to you there. So I said, what is it? So he said, I don't really know, but, and then he said, why don't you go talk to Amir Pnueli? That was the sentence word for word. And I said, who is Amir Pnueli? And he said, well, he's a brilliant young guy along on the same corridor where your algebraic topology professor is at Tel Aviv University. And that's what I did. There was no internet, so I think I knocked on his door and I walked in, and I spent about an hour with him. Came in with a face like that and came out all beaming. I think he lent me Zohar Mana's first book on the theory of computation. I had program schemes, flowcharts, some theory, and that for me was a complete miracle because from that point on I just switched to computer science, did my master's under Amir, and then went on. Took this as a career. If I hadn't heard that sentence, and if Amir was not around, and if he hadn't treated me so nicely during that hour, nothing would have happened. Again, on a personal level, Amir was the first person to appreciate this state charts language. This photo is from 1984, and I'd like to point out to you the temporal logic down here. So this is what I started using after talking to Amir to explain the semantics of state charts. And I'm not putting this up for just for nothing. Again, if Amir hadn't talked to me about this and encouraged me to move forward and write a paper, for example, I would probably just have thought that this was something that, maybe people could be using out there in industry because it happened when I was consulting in an industrial setting, and I didn't really think much of it as a contribution to science. But it was Amir who said, go read the literature, and maybe there's more to it than you think. Now, Amir and I spent almost 30 years living on the same corridor at Weizmann, and we did some things together, not as much as one may imagine, but we never really worked at the institute. He never sat in my office to work, or I never sat in his office to work. Things that we did together were always either done on a plane or at the line to lunch at a conference, or in Australia or in some other places. And in fact, the notion of reactive system was born on a plane. This is not the plane and this is not the flight, but this is a plane and a flight, and that's Amir. But it was on one of these occasions where we were sitting next to each other, and I was, in my usual way, telling him in excited words about what I'd been doing. And then I said, but I'm not quite sure how to characterize the systems for which this seems to be good. And he said, why don't we call them reactive systems? And that was a bingo. And then And then we went on and worked that out together. So it was his term that made this happen. I mentioned that Amir was very self-deprecating and almost criminally modest, in the sense that when you saw how he traversed life, you always felt ashamed of yourself for not being even half as modest as he was. And this is a wonderful story. I call it the Muli Safra story. This picture was taken, I think, much later. That's Muli Safra. That's, who knows who this is? Oded Mahler. And that's Amir. And so here's the Muli Safra story. Safra was, I think, second-year PhD student in our institute under Amir, and he was looking at all kinds of things and working on all kinds of things. And then Amir went away for a few months, and Muli started working on the determinization problem for Buki automata, which had been open for 20 or 25 years. And he solved it, as many of you know. There's the beautiful Safra construction, and a lot of work has happened since then. And when Amir talks about this, he claims that this is his greatest contribution to science, is going abroad for a few months and leaving Safra on his own, because if he were there, he would have told him not to work on this problem at all, and then this wouldn't have happened. So this is how Amir made a major contribution to a major result in automata field. And he tells this story not out of false modesty, but he really believes that that was his, one of his greatest contributions to science. This is an interesting picture in which Amir received the Israel Prize. This is our ex-Chief Justice. This is our ex-President Ezer Weizmann, who is the nephew of the person for which our institute is named, who used to himself be the President of the State of Israel. This is Ehud Barak, who was then Prime Minister. And this is Ehud Olmert, who was then the mayor of Jerusalem, another one of the 5 or 6 people who stand up there, and then later Prime Minister, maybe soon to be put away. And now I'd like to, maybe I'll tell you one more little story, which I think is also, before I get to this, which is also telling of Amir's. So I remember when I was preparing these things to say at his funeral, I sat at home and tried to think of any of Amir's vices. And so we're all human beings, and even a person as wonderful as that, and a scientist as great as that, has some disadvantages. And I found 2. One was that he was always late. He was late in delivering his papers, he was late in delivering his reports, he had to be prompted. But in his defense, he always did it in the end, often after the end, and he always did it in the best possible way. So you needed a letter of recommendation for someone, so he wouldn't do it, and then he wouldn't do it, and he wouldn't do it, and he would prompt, and then he would get a tremendously detailed letter. Which brings me to the second of his major vices, which was that he was always too nice to people when writing about them or talking about them. In fact, when we had our faculty meetings about candidates, although Amir was clearly the star of the faculty, his opinions were taken with a grain of salt because everyone was so good and everyone was so tremendous. And in his defense, I'd like to say that he used to do this because he really believed it. He really believed that people were very good, and even mediocre or mediocre plus or star minus epsilon people were all stars in his life. And the story I'd like to share with you is the following. So I once, must have been 15 or 20 years ago, I sat on a promotion committee for someone in another university who was being promoted to a certain rank. And the way that committee happened to work, which is a little different from the way our institution works, or maybe the things that you're familiar with, the way it works was that the committee really met and convened only after all the letters of recommendation had arrived. It was the chairperson's role, maybe together with the department head, to solicit the letters and to receive them, and then the committee sat down, read the letters, had a lengthy deliberation, and made a decision. So I wasn't the chairman. I just come to this meeting and I sit down there, and there are these letters, and we get 20 minutes or half an hour just to read the letters, and before the discussion starts, and I start reading these letters, and one of them is from Amir. And Amir says, Dr. So-and-so is really tremendous, he's wonderful, he's excellent, he's real, on and on. And then he says, and he is even better if you take the same time in their career as X, Y, David Harel, Z, W. So I read this and I smile because I know Amir and I also know the candidate. And by the way, he was right in this letter. But the chairman of the committee went red in the face and suddenly realized he should have seen this and censored it from the letter, or maybe asked Amir to remove my name. And so he was all apologetic, and I said, forget it, it's fine, it's okay. The guy got the promotion, and I went home. 2 days later, there's a knock on my office door. And as I said to you, we almost never went into each other's offices because we were so busy. And Amir comes in pale with a sheaf of papers. And he says, I heard about this, we call it in Hebrew, fadicha, this fiasco at this meeting the other day. And I said, Amir, it's fine, it's fine. And by the way, you were right. He says, no. He says, you've never seen me insistent like I'm going to be now, but I insist that you now read these letters which show what I write about someone who I really think is very, very good. And he pushes and he pushes these letters of recommendation that he wrote about me a few years earlier when I was up for this, I think the same rank. And I said, I don't want to see these letters. It's fine. And he said, no, I'm not leaving this room until you read these letters. So he sat there, and I had to skim through these letters. So this was Amir, and the way he wrote the letters. On a slightly more serious note, there are a couple of volumes that are being prepared in Amir's memory, as many of you may know, and for one of them there is a paper that I completed a little while ago with Hillel Kugler, who was my PhD student but also worked under Amir, and I want to quote verbatim, just leaving out a couple of words here and there, the final closing section of that paper. And the section is called The Pledge. And let me read it out for you. We are fully aware of the fact that in this paper we've only touched upon the topic of blah, blah, blah. The truth is that not only do we deeply miss Amir Pnueli personally, but we are confident that he would have been the ideal colleague with whom to continue this line of work. His pioneering research on hybrid systems, his unparalleled understanding of semantic issues for reactivity, and his rare scientific wisdom would all have made the future work on this topic far easier and the results far better than we can ever expect them to become in his absence. Nevertheless, we pledge to forge forward with this work with whatever meager talents and abilities we can muster and bring it to a state where it can be seriously evaluated, blah, blah, blah. And I still have 3 or 4 minutes, Moshe. So I'd like to do the following thing. I'm going to, hopefully the internet is working, I tried it out earlier. I'm going to leave you with Amir live at one of these rare websites where he was recorded at a lecture, not because of the science again, that's not the point. This is the part where he's introduced, and the really, I don't want to use superlatives, but the idiosyncratic Amir way of thanking the introducer for introducing him and moving into the talk itself. So hopefully this will work, and we'll just leave it on for 3 or 4 minutes, and that'll be the end of my talk here.
And where he founded the computer science department. He's currently at Courant Institute with research interests in program application, especially concurrent programs. And he's very well known, of course, for his excellent work introducing temporal logic in computer science, for which work he also got the Turing Award in 1996 for this really seminal work. So today I think he will talk to us about verification, and welcome you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much for your kind introduction, and also thank the organizers for giving me the opportunity of speaking here. In return for all of this generosity, I'm going to start by behaving in a very rude manner, by starting by contradicting the first statement that has been made by our guest of honor on the first day.
This was Joe.
The next slide I actually prepared immediately on the first day after hearing his first lecture. And I felt a little unpleasant about it because, you know, this is our guest of honor, and I right away start insulting him or arguing with him. But I got much calmer after I heard his second lecture, because in the second lecture he actually contradicted himself. If you remember what happened, in the first lecture he told us we don't know how to construct correct systems. And then in the next lecture he proceeded to show us how to construct correct systems. So probably we should all accept the first statement as just a stronger way to express that the task is very difficult, rather than believe that it's impossible, or we don't know how to do it. As I will elaborate a little more on my next slide, as a matter of fact, we do understand most of the principles. The only thing is that practicing them and applying them is a difficult thing. And as I said there, so we know most of the theory, not perfectly. There are still many gaps, in particular the particular direction that Joseph now is working on. Composition of heterogeneous system is something that has not been paid much attention in the past. In the past, people were more concerned about composition of homogeneous systems, but the principles are more or less understood. The only problem is that we are not ready to pay the price. As a matter of fact, I may ask you personally, how many of you would be ready to pay $500 extra for a verified version of Windows when you buy your next computer? Well, I cannot offer you this thing, but I think the majority of people, or at least Microsoft, does not feel it's a good business. For some reason, they rather keep sending you fixes and patches and all of that kind, and make money out of the vulnerabilities of the system. Maybe if there is a customer rebellion or demand verified versions, then so in general we are not ready to pay the price. And of course we all try to compare. Why is it that in computer science we use less disciplined methods than in most other disciplines? And I have my own version of this is the discipline in which it's easiest to construct bad things without immediate penalty. The penalty, usually you have to pay much longer along the road, and of course every responsible developer of software will try to do his best effort not to have bugs directly, but it's just very easy to sit down and write. Imagine the following scenario. Suppose we wanted to build a new atom bomb, the first atom bomb. Then if we would proceed in the way that some people develop software today, we say, well, let's take several people together, let's put some things together, some amount of uranium, and then make the thing combust, and let's first build it, and then we'll test it. This will look very silly to you, but I don't know how many of you, well, this was much before your birth. This actually was the way that the first atom bomb has been constructed. So even though people had all the theories of physics and everything, they were not able to compute in advance what is the right quantities and how to build it. And why is that? Well, they had the theories, but they were not sure how precise they were, and how faithful, and how good was the modeling. So as a matter of fact, the Manhattan Project, if you are familiar with the historical, they constructed it first, and then tested it later.
Here.
Thank you.
This production is copyright the University of Edinburgh.